Today, we're heading to Boulder, Colorado, a town famous for its progressive politics and stunning landscapes. But in early June 2017, this peaceful community became the scene of a terrible crime, a murder that would forever change the lives of those connected to it. This is the story of a complicated love affair that led to a murder so shocking it's hard to imagine. Paul Barstow, a 36-year-old from Boulder, Colorado, seemed to have it all, finding a balance between his career and personal life. Paul worked as a software engineer, known for his expertise and reliability in the field. He was passionate about his work, often talking about his dream to create an innovative app called Lehman, named after a pioneering female writer aimed at revolutionizing the way people engaged with sexuality through technology. When he wasn't coding, Paul spent his time as an artist, exploring his creative side. Paul had a passion for painting landscapes, frequently inspired by the breathtaking views of Boulder, nestled at the base of the Rocky Mountains. He was also a devoted father to his 2 young children from a previous marriage. Despite the difficulties of being a single parent, he always made sure to spend quality time with them. Paul's friends described him as calm, thoughtful, and reliable, a person who valued routine and found comfort in the predictability of his daily life. In the days leading up to his death, everything appeared normal on the outside. However, those who knew him well began to notice he was growing increasingly uneasy. Paul's relationship with his sister-in-law, Angelica Barstow, had always been complicated. 5 years earlier, they had begun an affair in secret, offering Paul an escape from life's pressures, but also filling him with guilt and anxiety. He became especially troubled by the growing closeness between Angelica and her husband, Jason, ironically Paul's younger brother. Paul was looking forward to a weekend getaway he had planned with his children. He had rented a cabin near Estes Park, eager to escape the complications at home and enjoy some quality time with them. He'd mentioned visiting the Stanley Hotel, known for inspiring Stephen King's The Shining, and possibly taking his kids on a ghost tour. But Paul would never get to take that trip. His life, full of aspirations and a deep love for nature, was about to be abruptly and tragically cut short. On the night of June 5, 2017, Boulder was peaceful, with a gentle breeze rustling through the trees. The city was winding down, embracing the warmth of summer as most people settled into the comfort of their homes. Around 10:30 p.m., Jason Barstow, Paul's younger brother, arrived at Paul's house. He had been trying to get in touch with him all day, but his calls and texts had gone unanswered for several days. Jason, known for his easygoing nature, initially assumed his brother might be out hiking or simply busy with the kids, but as the hours went by, his concern grew. When he arrived at Paul's house, he noticed the front door was slightly ajar. An odd sight, considering Paul was usually meticulous about home security. Jason paused for a moment, then pushed the door open and stepped inside. The house was unnervingly silent, with only the ticking of a wall clock breaking the stillness. He called out Paul's name, but there was no reply. As Jason moved deeper into the house, he noticed signs of a struggle in the living room. An overturned chair, papers scattered across the floor, and a coffee mug shattered nearby. His heart began to race as he hurried toward the bedroom. There, in the bedroom, Jason found Paul's lifeless body lying on the floor near the bed. Paul's face was pale, and a length of rope was still tightly wrapped around his neck. The sight was so horrifying that Jason froze, unable to comprehend what he was looking at. For a few moments, Jason stood there in shock, struggling to make sense of the scene. His brother, once so full of life, now lay motionless on the floor. After what felt like an eternity, Jason finally managed to pull out his phone and dial 911. His voice shaking, Jason told the operator what he had found, barely able to get the words out. The dispatcher calmly instructed him to wait outside until the police arrived. In a daze, Jason stumbled out of the house, his mind racing, trying to process the unimaginable. He sat on the front steps, staring blankly at the street, struggling to hold back tears. Within minutes, the wail of sirens echoed through the neighborhood as Boulder police arrived. Neighbors peeked out from their windows, curious about the flashing lights, but Jason couldn't bring himself to look at anyone. His world had just crumbled, and all he could do was wait as the nightmare unfolded. The Boulder police arrived swiftly at Paul Barstow's home on the night of June 5, 2017. The flashing lights and wailing sirens broke the silence of the quiet neighborhood, signaling to nearby residents that something terrible had occurred. Detective Laura Reynolds, a seasoned investigator with 15 years of experience, was the first to arrive on the scene. Known for her no-nonsense attitude and sharp instincts, Reynolds immediately sensed that this was no ordinary death. As she stepped into the house, she took in the chaos, broken items, signs of a struggle that suggested something far more sinister had occurred. A living room appeared to be the aftermath of a struggle. An overturned chair, scattered papers, and a shattered coffee mug painted a picture of disorder. But it was the scene in the bedroom that confirmed her worst fears. Paul Barstow lay on the floor, a length of rope still tightly wound around his neck. His face was pale, his eyes empty of life. The sight was deeply unsettling, even for someone as seasoned as Detective Reynolds. The crime scene team quickly went to work, photographing the room from every angle and collecting evidence. They dusted for fingerprints, took samples from the rope, and carefully bagged the broken pieces of the coffee mug. Reynolds observed the position of Paul's body. His hands showed defensive wounds, and there were clear signs of bruising around his neck and face. To Reynolds, the evidence clearly indicated a violent struggle, suggesting that Paul had fought for his life. However, not everyone on the team shared her conclusion. As the investigation continued, tensions began to rise and a controversy started to unfold. Some forensic experts offered a different interpretation of the scene. Dr. Matilda Chiang, a respected forensic pathologist known for her thoroughness, suggested that the evidence could point to a suicide rather than a murder. She observed that the rope was tied in a way that could have been self-inflicted, and the disorder in the living room might have been the result of Paul acting in a state of distress. Dr. Chiang argued that it wasn't uncommon for individuals in deep emotional turmoil to stage scenes before taking their own lives. This conflicting perspective created tension within the investigation. On one side, Detective Reynolds and her team were certain Paul had been murdered, likely during a violent struggle. On the other side, Dr. Chiang and her supporters advocated for a more nuanced interpretation, suggesting the possibility of suicide. This disagreement slowed the investigation, forcing the team to consider both theories and examine every piece of evidence from multiple perspectives. As the days went on, the pressure on the Boulder Police Department intensified, with public scrutiny mounting. The media quickly caught wind of the conflicting theories, with local outlets like the Denver Post, known for its investigative journalism, running stories that questioned whether the police were on the right track. The controversy only deepened the anguish of Paul's family, who were desperate for answers. They wanted to know the truth, whether it was murder or suicide, and urged the police to uncover what had really happened to the man they loved. Angelica Barstow, Paul's sister-in-law, quickly became the first person of interest in the investigation. At 34, Angelica was known in Boulder for her eccentric personality. She ran a popular YouTube channel, Fairy Works, with nearly 1,000,000 subscribers, where she shared videos about her experiences with fairies and other spiritual beings. The channel had gained significant attention, but much of it was negative. Newspapers and online outlets covered her, but mostly to criticize her, with thousands of viewers leaving hateful comments, calling her a liar and accusing her of faking everything. By June 2017, the constant negativity had started to take a serious toll on Angelica's mental health. Angelica's marriage to Jason Barstow, Paul's younger brother, had been troubled for years. Friends and neighbors had witnessed frequent public arguments, with Angelica often seen angrily berating Jason. On one occasion, she publicly humiliated him, forcing him to strip and shout that he was a loser in front of others. These incidents painted a picture of a woman unraveling, and the police were aware of the strain in Angelica's personal life as they began their investigation. Detective Laura Reynolds, leading the case, quickly zeroed in on Angelica as a potential suspect, carefully considering any motive she might have had. It was no secret that Angelica had felt trapped in her marriage, and her affair with Paul had offered her a way out. The affair had been intense and secretive, with several sexually explicit texts between the two found on Paul's phone. But as Paul began to pull away, likely due to the growing tension and fear in his own life, Angelica's feelings of desperation and betrayal may have intensified. During her interrogation, Angelica remained calm, almost detached. She acknowledged the affair but firmly denied any involvement in Paul's death. "The fairies told me he was pulling away," she told Detective Reynolds, a statement that added another layer of confusion to the already strange investigation. "But Lady Luna Lovegood as my witness, I would never hurt him. How I loved him," Angelica insisted. Her words were firm, but her demeanor struck Detective Reynolds as odd. Too calm and composed for someone who had just lost a close family member under such tragic circumstances. Detective Reynolds noticed that whenever Angelica was asked about her relationship with Paul, her eyes darted around the room, as if searching for the right answer. As the questioning wore on, Angelica began to show signs of agitation. She continued to deny any involvement in Paul's death, but when pressed about her whereabouts on the night of the murder, she couldn't provide a clear explanation. Her alibi was vague, and when Detective Reynolds pressed her for more details, Angelica grew defensive. "I don't have to tell you everything. The fairies will," she snapped, her voice rising with agitation. The police carefully noted Angelica's behavior, which only heightened their suspicions. Despite her denials, the evidence against her was largely circumstantial. The texts confirmed the affair, but they didn't prove she had any role in Paul's death. Still, Angelica's unstable behavior and the tension in her marriage made her a prime suspect. As the investigation progressed, Detective Reynolds and her team kept a close watch on her, hoping for any slip-up that could shed more light on her involvement in Paul's death. Next on the list of suspects was Jason Barstow, Paul's younger brother and Angelica's husband. Jason, 29, was known in Boulder as a stable career, and he was very pleased by the opportunities he was being offered. As the investigation progressed, Detective Reynolds and her team kept a close watch on her and Angelica's husband. Jason, 29, was known in Boulder as a stable career. His easygoing attitude made him popular with others, but it often led to tension at home, particularly with Angelica, who grew increasingly frustrated with his lack of ambition. Jason's relationship with Paul had been strained for years, not only because of the affair with Angelica, but also due to the deep-seated envy he felt toward his older brother's success and stability. The police were well aware of this sibling rivalry as they began questioning him. Detective Laura Reynolds, leading the investigation, found Jason cooperative but noticed his nervousness, which seemed to grow with each question. When asked about his whereabouts on the night of Paul's death, Jason claimed he had been at a local bar, The Sink, watching the Rockies game and chatting with friends. However, when the police checked his alibi, it fell apart. The bartender didn't recall seeing him that night, and none of the regulars could confirm his presence either. Jason's inconsistent story raised suspicions, but there was more to the investigation. Tension in his marriage to Angelica was well known. Friends had observed how Jason would often avoid confrontations with her, retreating into his laid-back demeanor whenever arguments escalated. This pattern of avoidance only added to the growing list of reasons the police had to scrutinize him more closely. Beneath his laid-back exterior, Jason had become increasingly resentful of his brother's long-term affair with Angelica. Paul had everything Jason desired: a successful career, a stable life, and for a time, a sexual relationship with Jason's own wife. During his interrogation, Jason tried to downplay the affair's effect on him, but his strained responses hinted at deeper feelings of anger and betrayal. "Yeah, I was mad," he admitted to Detective Reynolds, "but I wasn't going to do anything about it. Paul was my brother, and while we had our differences, I'd never hurt him." The police pressed Jason about his relationship with Angelica. Specifically the public arguments that had been witnessed by neighbors. Jason shrugged them off, saying, "Angelica's got a temper, but it's nothing serious. We argue." His dismissal of the issues seemed to downplay the growing tensions in their marriage, but Detective Reynolds wasn't convinced. "Then we bleep each other until we faint." "But who doesn't?" Jason said with a half-hearted chuckle. His attempt to downplay the tension, however, didn't convince the detectives. There was something off in the way he avoided eye contact when asked about the night of Paul's murder, a subtle shift that made them question whether he was hiding something. Despite the inconsistencies in his story, there was no concrete evidence linking Jason to the crime. His motive, anger and jealousy, was clear, but without more solid proof, the police couldn't make a definitive case against him. Still, Jason remained under close scrutiny, with Detective Reynolds and her team carefully observing his every move as the investigation unfolded. The final suspect in the investigation was Linda Barstow, Paul's ex-wife. At 48 years old, Linda was known for her fiercely protective nature, especially when it came to their 2 children. Her controlling tendencies had caused ongoing friction within the extended Barstow family for years, and many wondered whether that tension had played a role in Paul's death. Linda and Paul had divorced amicably on the surface, but those close to the family knew there was lingering tension beneath. Despite the split, Linda had never fully let go of her influence over Paul's life, often meddling in his personal affairs and showing up unannounced at his home. This persistent involvement in his life after the divorce had always been a sore point, especially since Linda had a history of favoring Paul's younger brother Jason, which only fueled further animosity within the family. The obvious favoritism had always created tension between the brothers, but Linda didn't seem to care about how it affected their bond. In fact, she had always been particularly close to Jason, even having a brief affair with him when he was just 18. This secret relationship was hardly hidden and only made the family's already complicated dynamics more awkward. When the police brought Linda in for questioning, she remained calm but cautious. Detective Laura Reynolds conducted the interview, asking about Linda's relationship with Paul in the months before his death. Linda maintained that she had moved on from their marriage and that their interactions were purely focused on co-parenting. "I moved on a long time ago," she said firmly. "Our only focus was on board and Salter, nothing else." But Detective Reynolds wasn't persuaded. Linda had a history of getting involved in Paul's affairs, and there were rumors that she didn't approve of his relationship with Angelica. Some of Linda's friends told the police she had often expressed her dislike for Angelica, believing she wasn't right for the family. As soon as Linda heard about Paul's death, she wasted no time blaming Angelica, telling detectives that she had always suspected something was off with her. Throughout the interrogation, Linda insisted she was innocent, but her hostility toward Angelica was obvious. "She was never good enough for Paul, and I told him that," Linda admitted. "I didn't want that woman anywhere near my kids," Linda said angrily. Despite her intense feelings, she denied any role in Paul's death, especially given the effect it would have on their children. The police were left with more questions than answers. Linda had a motive: her desire to protect her children and her resentment toward Angelica. But, like Jason, there was no concrete evidence connecting her to the crime. Her strong personality and tendency to control things made her a key person of interest. Without solid proof, the detectives couldn't make an arrest. The investigation moved forward, still trying to uncover the truth behind Paul's tragic death. Then, on July 12, 2017, just when things seemed to be at a standstill, a new piece of evidence surfaced that changed everything. It was a warm, sunny morning, typical for Boulder in early summer. As a neighbor walked her dog, Mary Sinclair Varlitz, she noticed something odd in the Barstow's trash can, which had been left out by the curb. Curious by nature, she took a quick look inside and saw what looked like a torn piece of fabric stained with blood. Shaken by what she saw, she quickly called the police. Detective Laura Reynolds and her team arrived at the scene not long after. They collected the fabric, which was identified as part of a shirt, frayed at the edges and soaked in what was later confirmed to be Paul Barstow's blood. This discovery was crucial. It directly challenged the theory of suicide and suggested a violent struggle had taken place. The fabric matched the DNA found around Paul's neck, making it a critical piece of evidence in the investigation. Forensic experts were brought in to examine the rope and the bloodstains in more detail. They also searched the Barstow's trash can for any additional clues, but found nothing else of significance. Still, the discovery of the rope was enough to reopen and intensify the investigation. Detective Reynolds felt a renewed sense of urgency. "This changes everything," she thought. With the new evidence in hand, the detectives went back to their list of suspects. The torn piece of T-shirt had likely been discarded in a hurry, perhaps by someone familiar with the Barstow home. The timing of the trash being taken out indicated the killer was close to the family and knew their routines. The team realized they needed to re-interview the suspects, focusing on their movements in the days after Paul's death and any link to the rope. The discovery of the blood-stained T-shirt piece was a pivotal moment in the investigation. It gave the detectives the key evidence needed to rule out suicide and shift their focus to finding the killer. The quest for justice for Paul Barstow was far from finished, but now the police had a new lead that could uncover the truth. On July 15, 2017, Detective Laura Reynolds and her team made a breakthrough in the case. After weeks of questioning and gathering evidence, they identified Angelica Barstow as the prime suspect in Paul Barstow's murder. Angelica, 34, was Paul's sister-in-law and had been secretly involved with him in an affair that lasted 5 years. Angelica's odd behavior, including her fascination with fairies on her YouTube channel and the emotional instability she displayed, had already raised suspicions among the detectives. Her alibi also began to crumble. She initially claimed to be at home with her children the night Paul was murdered, but neighbors had spotted her Chevy Malibu near Paul's house around the time of the crime. Angelica's erratic behavior and emotional outbursts had been observed by friends and family alike. Her YouTube channel, Fairy Works, where she spoke about fairies as if they were real, had earned a reputation for its strange content, which seemed to mirror her unstable state of mind. On the morning of June 15, detectives arrived at Angelica's home to execute an arrest warrant. Angelica was found at her kitchen table, disheveled and clearly anxious, wearing only a bra. When the police informed her she was being arrested for Paul's murder, her reaction was one of shock. Her face drained of color, and she burst into tears. "I didn't do it," she sobbed. "The fairies made me do it." Her claims about fairies seemed out of place and further raised doubts about her mental condition. Angelica was taken into custody, and the police conducted a detailed search of her home. They discovered more evidence connecting her to the crime, including personal items belonging to Paul and more pieces of rope that matched the one found in the trash. During the interrogation, Angelica maintained that she had been manipulated by fairies, a claim that seemed increasingly irrational. During her arrest, Angelica seemed confused and terrified, unable to grasp the gravity of the situation. Her emotional outbursts and bizarre explanations only reinforced the police's suspicion that she was involved in the murder. Detective Reynolds later called the arrest a pivotal moment in cracking the case. Angelica Basto's arrest shocked the Boulder community. People were stunned to learn that the seemingly devoted mother and wife could be linked to such a brutal crime. As the investigation progressed, attention turned to uncovering Angelica's motive and understanding her mental state, while the details of her involvement in Paul's murder slowly came to light. The trial of Angelica Basto started on August 7, 2018, at Boulder County Court. The atmosphere in the courtroom was charged with tension as people gathered to seek justice for Paul Basto. The case had drawn significant media attention, with local news outlets closely following every new development. Angelica's trial was filled with emotional moments and tense courtroom drama. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Rachel Stone, argued that Angelica had premeditated and carried out Paul's murder. Stone, a 42-year-old attorney known for her firm approach to violent crimes, presented a compelling case, outlining Angelica's clear motive. Stone argued that Angelica's jealousy and unstable mental state drove her to murder her brother-in-law and lover. She emphasized the affair between Angelica and Paul, as well as her erratic behavior, including her strange claims about fairies influencing her actions. In contrast, the defense, led by 50-year-old attorney Harold Green, presented a different argument. Green argued that Angelica was suffering from severe mental illness and should not be held fully responsible for her actions. He told the court that she was experiencing a psychological breakdown and presented evidence of her ongoing struggles with mental health. This included her obsession with fairies and her erratic behavior, suggesting that she was not in a clear state of mind when the crime took place. Throughout the trial, Paul's family attended every day, their faces marked by grief. They listened as the details of Paul's murder were revealed, including the bloody rope and Angelica's troubled history. The emotional toll on the family was clear as they heard about the affair and Angelica's strange claims about fairies. After several days of testimony and closing arguments, the jury deliberated and reached a verdict on August 14, 2018. Angelica Basto was found guilty of first-degree murder. The verdict brought a mix of relief and sorrow to Paul's family, who felt justice had been served, yet continued to mourn their loss. On August 21, 2018, Angelica was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. The judge's decision underscored the gravity of her crime and its profound effect on Paul's family. While many viewed the sentence as a just punishment, others felt it was too harsh, given Angelica's mental health struggles.